Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something a little different. Imagine pulling a heavy wooden door open, and instead of your warm living room, you walk straight into Dark Age Britain. It's damp, cold, and smoky, and honestly, you wouldn't last 5 minutes without Wi-Fi or running water. You're wrapped in scratchy wool, there's mud everywhere, and the food smells like someone boiled sadness with a hint of onion. And trust me, you'd complain about the lack of coffee before the sun even came up. You sure wouldn't survive long out here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I've been feeling really motivated lately whenever I see your comments pop up, telling me where you're listening, from awe that you actually drifted off to sleep with one of these rambles. It makes me laugh, in the best way, knowing someone in Ohio or maybe in Berlin is dozing off while I whisper about medieval plumbing. So if you want, drop a quick line with your time zone and location. I find it oddly comforting to know who's snoozing where. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle your feet down a narrow, muddy lane. The air tastes like smoke and damp earth, a cocktail no Michelin star chef would ever dare serve. People huddle near small fires, their cloaks more whole than fabric. Every sound carries strangely in the miscart's creak. Chickens protest loudly, and a dog growls at nothing in particular. You glance down at your shoes, or well, there, more like sacks tied with string, and you can't help but think your sneakers back home would weep if they saw this mess. A woman stirs a pot at the edge of the lane. The steam rises, heavy with the smell of cabbage, and it clings to your clothes like a needy friend. Her hands are red and cracked from the cold, but her expression is steady, almost calm, as if this routine of endless boiling has numbed her. You watch a boy run past, barefoot, splashing mud that will never wash out. His laugh cuts through the fog, a reminder that kids can find joy even in what feels like a nightmare Airbnb. And here's something people often forget: life wasn't constant doom and gloom. Sure, the name Dark Ages makes you picture endless misery, but there were small moments of normalcy, even joy. People told stories by the fire, they carved silly little figures into wood, and sometimes they danced badly, but with heart. Historians still argue whether Dark Age is even the right label, because it wasn't pitch black despair every second. Maybe dim lighting is more accurate as you keep walking. You notice a cluster of huts, smoke puffing out of them in uneven bursts. The smell of wood mixed with animal dung is overwhelming, like someone lit a candle called farmyard chaos. Inside, families squeeze together on straw bedding, the warmth of livestock literally the central heating system of the day. You think about your thermostat at home and wonder how many complaints these people would leave on Yelp if they could. There's something strangely soothing about the rhythm of it all. The sounds of grinding grain, the steady thud of a blacksmith's hammer in the distance, and the rustle of wool skirts brushing against the ground. It's raw, repetitive, almost hypnotic, the kind of white noise that could lull you into a trance. You catch yourself breathing slower, as though your body wants to sync with the hum of this ancient place. But don't relax too quickly. Around the bend, you hear raised voices. Two men argue over a pig who owns it, who stole it, or maybe who's just jealous it eats better than they do. Their words are lost in the fog, but the gestures are universal. One points, the other waves his arms, and you can tell this squabble will end with mud, fists, or both. And just when you think about stepping in, you realize this is their world, not yours. Better to stay quiet, to observe, to let the scene unfold. You feel a tingle of curiosity, that itch of wanting to know what comes next. Because if this is only the first glimpse, just one street, one pot of cabbage, one argument over livestock, what else is waiting deeper in the mist? And as the night grows colder, you realize you've barely scratched the surface. You keep moving down the lane, your feet sinking a little deeper with every step, and suddenly the rhythm of daily survival begins to reveal itself. It's early morning, though the light doesn't really feel like morning, at all more like a grey filter that someone slapped over the whole world. A rooster crows half-heartedly, sounding as tired as you feel when your alarm goes off on a Monday. People stir awake not because they're rested, but because the work doesn't wait. You can almost hear the collective groan of an entire village, stretching stiff limbs, then trudging toward another day of the grind. You notice a man hefting a wooden plow, the kind that makes you want to thank every engineer who ever invented metal. His ox lumbers along, ribs faintly showing, pulling that crude blade through mud so thick it clings like unpaid rent. You watch as he leans his entire weight into the handle, face grim, eyes squinting. And for a moment, you realize this is what life was. Repetition, muscle, and mud. Not glamorous, not epic, just the sheer weight of getting by. Nearby, women squat by a stream, beating laundry against stones. The water is icy, their hands are red, and you feel cold just watching. The sound of fabric smacking rock has a strange rhythm to it, like percussion in some forgotten folk band. And you think about your washing machine at home, that dependable drum that complains only when you overstuff it with towels. These women would probably laugh if you told them about detergent pods. Little colorful things that look like candy but would kill you if you ate them. They already had enough problems without that kind of mistake. Food, as always, is at the center of everything. A pot of barley gruel bubbles slowly, thick enough to stop a spoon mid-swirl. A few families gather around, tearing bits of coarse bread, dipping it in, chewing with the same patience you'd use if you were forced to eat oatmeal for the 100th day in a row. Because you basically would be. Protein, if you're lucky, maybe a scrap of pork fat or a handful of beans, and yet you can see the quiet gratitude on their faces. Empty stomachs are a harsher critic than any picky eater. You wander past a small workshop where a blacksmith hammers sparks into the grey morning. The clang echoes like a heartbeat across the village. His arms are thick, his brow slick with sweat despite the chill, and the smell of hot iron stings your nose. This is the factory of the Dark Ages. One man, one forge, shaping the world one strike at a time. Tools, nails, horseshoes, things we now toss in a shopping cart without a thought here. They're priceless lifelines. And here's the twist. Most people don't realize. Not everyone lived in endless hunger or misery. Some had moments of comfort, even abundance. Archaeologists have found that people in certain regions had surprisingly diverse diet supples. Honey, even imported spices, trickled in when trade routes allowed. Of course, historians still debate how widespread that variety really was. Maybe one lucky village feasted on honey, while the next chewed bark and hoped for spring. Either way, the truth is messier than the doom and gloom headlines suggest. You catch yourself watching the children again. One girl skips rope with a piece of frayed twine, her laughter cutting through the air like a bright note in a minor song. A boy drags a stick through the mud, creating his own battlefield complete with miniature soldiers. Play, in its simple form, survives every century. And you smile because it feels so familiar how kids will find a game anywhere, even in the shadows of a tough world. But then, just as your shoulders start to relax, you hear the bell, a hollow clang from the wooden church tower at the village center. It's not Sunday, so it's not a call to worship. Instead, it's the signal. Work, gathering, maybe trouble. People look up instantly, faces tightening. You feel that pulse of unease ripple through the crowd, the way you'd tense if your phone suddenly lit up with an emergency alert. You're not sure what's coming, but you know it matters. The day grinds on, the chores stack up. And yet, you can't shake the sense that beneath this repetition is something fragile, almost poetic. Every loaf of bread baked, every bucket hauled, every spark hammered out of iron-knit survival written in small strokes. And while your modern mind wants to shout, "This is exhausting," you also feel a strange respect. These people didn't have the option to scroll TikTok when bored. They made life happen one aching step at a time. As the afternoon light fades into that same grey haze, you sense something stirring in the air. Maybe it's the tension after that bell. Maybe it's the way villagers glance toward the edge of town. Something beyond the daily grind is waiting. And you, caught in the rhythm of this place, can't help but lean forward, wanting to see what comes next. What might shift this endless routine into something unexpected? The sound of that bell lingers in your ears as you step closer to the village center, and suddenly the rhythm of daily life shifts. The peasants murmur among themselves, but your eyes catch something brighter at the edge of the square. A cluster of riders approaches, cloaks trimmed with fur, horses better fed than half the villagers. Their boots don't squelch in mud. They glide across it, as if the ground itself dares not stain them. The contrast hits you like a slap. You've just seen bare feet splashing in sludge, and now you're staring at polished leather that would survive a runway show. The riders dismount, and a servant unfurls a banner. Tonight, a feast at the manor. You can feel the collective sigh ripple through the villagers. They won't be invited, not unless they're carrying trays or scrubbing floors. You imagine the kitchen inside the Lord's Hall already roaring to life, meat roasting, bread stacked high, barrels of ale rolled out like treasure chests. The scent wafts faintly on the breeze, enough to make your own stomach grumble in betrayal. You find yourself drifting toward the hall. The building looms, wooden beams heavy and dark, smoke curling out of narrow slits. Inside, it's another world entirely. Long tables groan under the weight of food, roasted venison, whole chickens, wheels of cheese, bowls of fruit you didn't even know could grow this far north. Servants dart back and forth, sweat shining on their foreheads, balancing trays like jugglers in a circus. The Lord sits at the head, rings glittering, goblet in hand. He laughs too loudly at a joke, slams the table with a meaty fist, and juice from a roasted bird splatters onto his tunic, though of course, someone rushes to blot it clean before it stains. His guests raise cups, the hall buzzing with music, the clatter of knives, the kind of indulgence that makes you forget the world outside is mud and hunger. You watch as a minstrel plucks a lute, his song weaving through the air. The lyrics praise the Lord's generosity, an odd word when you know just outside the door, families huddle with empty bowls. But that's the rhythm of this age. One man's feast is another's famine, and historians still wrestle with just how wide the gap was. Some argue peasants weren't as perpetually starving as we imagine, that seasonal harvests gave them moments of fullness. Others insist the disparity was brutal, that the Lord's table was an island of plenty in a sea of scarcity. The truth, like most things, sits in the uneasy middle. Stepping back outside, the contrast is immediate. You see a woman crouched by a small fire, clutching a pot with barely a handful of barley grains swirling at the bottom. Her children stare into it as though willing more food to appear. The smell is faint, weak, almost mocking compared to the roasted meat drifting from the hall. She ladles out the thin broth, careful to give each child a sip. You realize this meal wouldn't keep you awake through a single Netflix episode. A boy next to her asks if tomorrow will be better. She ruffles his hair and smiles, though her eyes betray the doubt. It's a look every parent knows, that tightrope walk of protecting hope when reality bites hard. You feel the weight of it, that aching mix of love and hunger. Still, even here, life insists on moments of brightness. Someone produces a hunk of stale bread, cracks it in half, and passes it down the row. A neighbor laughs at a crude joke, and for a heartbeat, the fog of hunger lifts. Because people have always found ways to keep spirits alive, even if the menu is despair, garnished with nothing. The irony doesn't escape you. Inside the hall, a man complains the venison is a bit dry, while outside, a family prays for enough crumbs to last until dawn. It's a jarring split screen, the kind of thing you'd expect in a satire, but here it's reality. You almost hear the voiceover in your head. Meanwhile, in the dark ages, as night deepens, the music from the hall grows louder, mingling with the hollow quiet of the village. Your stomach tightens, caught between the sense of excess and the silence of need. And just when you think you've seen the full picture of feast and famine, a strange noise cuts through the niter cart, arriving laden with sacks. Grain, perhaps. Or maybe something else. Faces turn, eyes hungry not just for food, but for whatever shift this moment might bring. That cart rumbles off into the night, and the clamor of the feast behind the manor fades into the fog. The villagers slowly drift back toward their huts, but something else pulls your attention now. Rising above the smoke and mist is the crooked silhouette of the wooden church. Its bell tower leaning like it's had one too many cups of ale. By day, it's just another building, but at night it seems alive. The dark timbers whispering warnings you can't quite understand. You step closer and the air shifts. The smell of smoke gives way to incense, sharp and sweet, curling out the cracks of the heavy doors. A low chant vibrates inside, deep voices blending into a hum that makes your chest tighten. The door creaks and you slip in. Candles line the walls, flickering shadows across painted saints and carved crosses. The light glows warm, but it doesn't chase away the chill, only sharpens it. People kneel on the wooden floor, heads bowed, lips moving in murmured prayers. Some look desperate, clutching rosaries as if holding on for dear life. Others sit still, eyes wide with awe or maybe fear. You realize this is not just worship, it's survival. In a world where crops fail and feasts are reserved for the lords, faith is the only insurance plan they have. A priest in heavy robes raises his hands, his voice cutting through the murmurs. He speaks of sin, of darkness prowling in the night, of salvation through obedience. His words are both comfort and threat, like a parent saying, "I love you, but touch the cookies and you're doomed." You notice how everyone hangs on each syllable, as if missing a word might curse them. And here's the unsettling part. Belief and fear sit side by side, tangled so tightly you can't separate them. People light candles for lost children, pray for better harvests, and whisper protection against the evil eye. At the same time, they're terrified of angering saints, priests, or worse, the demons said to lurk in the woods just beyond the village. You glance at the shadows in the corner, half expecting glowing eyes to blink back at you. Historians still argue how much of this fear was stoked by the church, and how much simply grew out of the uncertainty of the age. Some say priests used fear to keep control, while others believe people genuinely found peace in these rituals. The truth, as always, flickers somewhere between the flame and the smoke. You watch as a woman slips forward, laying a small loaf of bread at the altar. Her offering looks pitiful compared to the groaning tables you saw earlier, but her face softens with relief as she bows her head. For her, this act means safety, or at least the illusion of it. You almost envy the clarity of her devotion. In your world, belief is complicated, often tangled with cynicism. Here, it's brutally simple. Believe or be damned. The chants rise again, filling the church with a vibration that prickles your skin. A child stirs in his mother's arms, eyes fluttering open just long enough to stare at the candle flames before slipping back into sleep. For a moment, you imagine how comforting it must be to drift off in that glow. Not questioning, not doubting, just letting the sound of prayers wrap around you like a blanket. But then, the priest speaks of omens, comets in the sky, storms out of season, animals born with twisted limbs. His tone sharpens, and suddenly everyone stiffens. You feel it too, that creeping anxiety that maybe the night hides more than shadows. Your pulse quickens, and you catch yourself glancing toward the door, toward the forest beyond. Faith may soothe, but fear never sleeps. As the final hymn dies away, the villagers file out silently, crossing themselves, whispering blessings, clutching one another's hands. You step back into the night with them, the fog closing in again. The feast has grown louder in the distance, but your thoughts linger on those faces in the candlelight, hopeful, fearful, utterly human. And as the cold air bites at your skin, you realize you're caught between two worlds, the comfort of belief and the terror of what might lurk unseen. You feel the tension coil tighter, as though the night itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to break. You find yourself stepping inside a wooden house, though calling it a house feels generous. The walls are rough timbers, drafts slipping easily through the cracks. Every creak of the floorboards reminds you that the ground beneath is simply earth, trodden flat and sprinkled with rushes. The smell is, how shall we say, complicated. Smoke curls thickly from the central hearth, refusing to leave through the hole in the roof, preferring instead to cling to your hair, your clothes, your lungs. And mixed in with the smoke, the scent of livestock, because yes, in many households, the goat and the family shared the same space. At least you'll never be lonely. Still, this is the center of warmth. The hearth flickers with fire, however small, and families gather close. You crouch near the flames, feeling heat kiss your cheeks while your back stays cold. The children sit cross-legged, eyes heavy after a day of work, soot painting their faces into something resembling little chimney sprites. A pot simmers with barley and cabbage plain fare, but tonight it feels like luxury. Outside, the wind bites, but inside there is a hush, broken only by the crackle of wood and the occasional sneeze when smoke stings. You glance at the rafters and see strips of salted meat hanging, though thin and few. Some winters, these rafters are bare, and families rely only on what they can scavenge. That divide between a good season and a bad season is measured not in riches, but in whether or not the stew has anything floating in it besides water. And yet, here lies comfort. The family huddles around the fire, stories whispered in low voices. You hear fragments of old tale saints performing miracles, heroes of the past, or sometimes simply gossip about neighbors. The firelight makes everyone's features softer, kinder. For a moment, smoke and hardship blur into intimacy. This smoky box of timber becomes, strangely, the safest place in the world. Historians still argue about just how widespread these hearth-centered homes were. Some insist livestock inside was the norm. Others suggest it was more a matter of poorer households. Either way, imagine trying to get a good night's sleep while a cow sighs heavily 2 feet away. Charming, isn't it? The hearth wasn't just for cooking and warmth. It was spiritual. Ashes were sometimes preserved, believed to hold protective powers. Families guarded their embers carefully. Letting the fire die was not only inconvenient but seen as unlucky. In some villages, when a new fire had to be lit, people borrowed flames from a neighbor, like passing along a fragment of life itself. Can you picture leaning across with a torch, whispering thanks as the spark crackles into your own hearth? It's strangely tender, and of course, the house itself wasn't private in the way we imagine today. Curtains, doors that actually shut. Forget it. Families, servants, sometimes animals, all crammed together. Privacy was a concept reserved for nobles behind stone walls. For the majority, life was overheard, overlapped, always shared. If you think roommates today are difficult, try living in a single, smoky room with 7 people and a pig. There's a rhythm here that seeps into you. The fire draws you in, even as your eyes sting from the haze. You lean closer, the warmth softening your bones, listening to voices fade into drowsy murmurs. Despite the filth, despite the closeness, there is security in this closeness too. Home was not comfort as we know it, but survival made tender by the glow of firelight. And as you sit there, in this smoke-soaked wooden chamber, you feel your breath slow. Each exhale blends with the haze above the flames. The house may be crude, but in this moment, it is alive with warmth, with togetherness. You can almost fall asleep right here, lulled by the fire's crackle and the rhythm of family voices. The air tastes of iron long before you see the battlefield. You hear the clash, first shields rattling, spears splintering, the dull thud of bodies colliding. The weapons are crude compared to the glittering swords of Hollywood spears tipped with iron. Wooden clubs studded with nails, axes that once chopped firewood now repurposed for flesh. It is not elegant. It is loud, clumsy, brutal. And you, standing in the mud, realize quickly that battles in the Dark Ages are not the neat duels of knights, but the messy chaos of neighbors smashing into neighbors. You see a man with nothing more than a wooden shield and a long knife. He's trembling not from cold, but from sheer terror. Next to him, another swings a heavy axe with the kind of energy that comes from knowing it's your family or theirs. The mud sucks at their boots, bodies tumble, screams tangle with war cries. The noise is relentless, a kind of storm you cannot escape. And when the clash finally dulls, when the field falls quiet except for the groans of the wounded, the real horror begins. Men stumble, clutching at gashes, broken limbs bent at unnatural angles. Without antiseptic, without anesthesia, healing is almost as brutal as battle itself. You step into the makeshift infirmary though. It's usually just a hut, or even the open field. A wounded man lies on a rough bench, his face pale, his lips pressed thin as a healer pours wine or honey into his wound, hoping it will cleanse infection. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it only makes the dying sweeter. Limbs too far gone are hacked off with a saw, no pain relief but a rag to bite down on. The screams echo, sharp enough to haunt even the strongest stomach. And if the patient survives the sawing, well, let's just say gangrene is always lurking nearby, eager to finish what the enemy began. There is no clean white bandage here. Instead, you see moss pressed against wounds, or cobwebs used to stem bleeding. Yes, cobwebs. Oddly enough, they contain natural clotting agents, which makes them one of the few treatments that sometimes actually worked. Historians still debate whether such methods were superstition or surprisingly practical science for the age. But the fact remains, many a warrior lay beneath layers of smoke and silk spun by spiders. Not exactly what your health insurance would recommend. The healer, often not much more than a village-wise woman, mutters charms as she works, her hands sticky with blood. Her remedies are equal parts herbs, prayers, and sheer willpower. You watch her crush garlic into a paste and press it onto a wound. Another man chews willow bark, for panther, crude ancestor of aspirin. But when fever sets in, when the wound blackens, everyone knows it is the end. Death sits quietly in the corner, patient as ever. And yet, despite the horror, there's a grim camaraderie here. Soldiers joke through their pain, laughing weakly about how they'll tell stories of their scars. One man nudges another, saying he'll claim the missing finger was lost fighting 3 enemies at once, not dropped by accident while chopping wood. Even in agony, they reach for humor, as if laughter might stitch them together better than thread. You feel yourself pulled into this strange rhythm. Battles, chaos, followed by the hush of suffering, where courage is measured not in killing, but in surviving what comes after. The hearth was warmth, but war is cold. Here, life and death balance on the edge of a rusted blade, and healing is as violent as the fight itself, so you sit in the shadows, breathing shallowly as the healer binds another wound with cloth torn from her own gown. The fire sputters, smoke rises, and the groans soften into silence. Some sleep, some slip away forever, and you, caught in this moment, realize how fragile a body is in this age, how every cut is a gamble, every bruise a threat. No wonder faith, fear, and superstition cling so tightly. When medicine is pain and luck, one whispers to saints as much as to healers. The night grows quiet, the battlefield stilled, and yet, in the hush of suffering, you feel your own breath slow, as though carried by the rhythm of the wounded sighing. War and wounds have a way of silencing everything but the pulse of survival. The first thing that greets you is smell, of course. A medieval market does not politely announce itself with a faint whiff of fresh bread or a subtle hint of flowers. No, it barges straight into your nose with a clash of salted fish, smoked meat, overripe fruit, hay trampled underfoot, and the occasional whiff of, let's just say, a pig had business to attend to. It's overwhelming, but in the same way an amusement park's noise is overwhelming, chaotic, messy, yet strangely inviting. You squeeze through the crowd, shoulders brushing against wool cloaks and leather jerkins. There are farmers shouting the virtues of their turnips, women with baskets of eggs balanced so gracefully you'd swear they'd trained for the circus, and children darting between stalls like arrows. One tugs at your cloak, wide-eyed, selling a few shriveled herbs tied in a bundle. He swears they'll cure headaches, heartache, and possibly the plague. Quite a bargain, really. The stalls stretch in rows, some no more than planks of wood laid across barrels, others proud little tents striped in faded colors. You see a butcher swinging a cleaver with unsettling enthusiasm. Chunks of meat displayed in the open air, flies circling like tiny vultures. Beside him, a baker pulls flat loaves from a stone oven. The crust blackened but warm, the scent a welcome reprieve from the smell of pig dung nearby. Every sense is a tact sound, smell, sight and your brain. Still wired for modern supermarkets with their polite background music, nearly sure. It is noisy. People haggle with a ferocity you'd reserve today for Black Friday electronics. A woman screams at a wool merchant because his yarn feels suspiciously thin. He swears on his grandmother's grave it's the finest in the Shire. The shouting is not anger, but theatre. Haggling is expected. If you pay the first price offered, you're either rich, foolish, or both. And here comes the mischief. As you pass a cart stacked with cabbages, you feel a light tug on your pouch. Your hand snaps down just in time to catch a boy's wrist. He looks up, all innocence and dirt-smudged cheeks, and mutters that he was only checking the stitching. Sure, you let him go, but your pouch feels suspiciously lighter. The crowd swallows him before you can be certain. Pickpocketing in the market is practically a tradition, passed down like folk songs. Some say children were trained by their parents, who preferred nimble fingers to honest ploughing. Not all mischief is theft. Some is creative marketing. A man selling pottery loudly declares his jugs are unbreakable, then accidentally drops one, which shatters dramatically. Gasps ripple through the crowd. He laughs, holding up another jug, insisting this one, of course, is the real unbreakable marvel. People buy two just in case. Historians still debate whether this was a scam or simply performance art. But either way, the man made a tidy profit. You drift toward the spice table. Tiny packets of cinnamon, pepper, and saffron gleam like jewels. They are astronomically expensive, guarded like treasure. One merchant boasts his peppercorns traveled from India, across seas and deserts, to land here in your humble palm. You nearly choke at the price. A pound of pepper could buy you a sheep. And here you were annoyed last week when your coffee beans cost extra. Some stalls are downright bizarre. A woman sells charms made from animal bones, swearing they ward off bad luck. Another hawks tiny glass beads, shimmering in the sun, though most peasants couldn't afford them. And there, in the corner, a man offers to tell your fortune if you cross his palm with silver. His accent is strange, his eyes theatrical, and the line of curious villagers is proof that the business of hope never goes out of fashion. The market isn't just commerce, it's social glue. Gossip spreads faster than honey on hot bread. You hear whispers about who's marrying whom, whose cow went missing, and whether the local lord will raise taxes again. A bard plucks at a lute, singing a song about a warrior too drunk to find his horse. People laugh, toss him a coin, then shuffle back to their errands. Children chase each other, giggling, until their mothers drag them by the ear. It's messy, loud, chaotic. It feels alive. And yet, beneath the cheer, mischief always lurks. Fake weights tip scales in favor of sly merchants. Bread is bulked out with chalk or sawdust, leaving you wondering why your teeth crunch. Wine is watered down shamelessly, but if you complain, the seller shrugs and points out that even the monks do it. Everyone cheats a little. It's almost expected. Honesty is noble, but trickery keeps bellies full. You linger at a cloth stall. Bolts of wool dyed with madder root gleam a deep red, while woad-dyed blues remind you of stormy skies. The merchant's daughter runs her hands over the fabric, smiling at you sweetly. For a moment, you forget the smell of fish and manure. Then she leans in, whispers that if you buy today, she'll throw in a spindle for free. It sounds like a deal, but as you hand over your coin, you notice the fabric is thinner than it looked in the light. She's already turned to the next customer, smiling just as sweetly. Through it all, you can't help comparing this chaos to the sanitized aisles of a modern store. No fluorescent lights here, no sterile plastic packaging, just noise, color, and the constant feeling you're either about to discover a treasure or get robbed blind, maybe both. The day stretches, shadows lengthen, but the market only grows louder. Drummers beat a rhythm near the square, jugglers toss knives to gasps and cheers, and a tooth puller sets up shop, offering to yank rotten molars in front of a gawking crowd. He flashes a pair of terrifying iron pliers, and suddenly you clutch your jaw a little tighter. Dentistry, it seems, was more spectacle than science. By nightfall, the stalls begin to close, goods packed away, scraps left for the pigs to The crowd thins, but the memory of the noise, the smells, the mischief lingers. You leave lighter of coin, heavier of experience. Maybe your pouch was lifted, maybe your bread has more sawdust than flour, but you've lived the heartbeat of a dark age market. And somehow, despite the chaos, it feels like you'd come back again tomorrow. You find yourself walking up a stone path toward a manor house, the kind that seems too large for its own good. Its walls loom, its banners flap lazily in the breeze, and its front door alone could double as the side of a ship. Inside, the lord reclines in his hall, a roaring fire painting his face gold, while servants scurry like nervous birds around him. He does not fetch his own food, nor pour his own drink, nor even bother to hold the goblet properly. A servant stands by, ready to tilt it toward his lips like he's a spoiled toddler who never quite learned fine motor skills. The hall is noisy with clattering platters, barking dogs, and the constant shuffle of feet. Meat roasts on a spit, dripping fat into the flames. A musician plucks a harp in the corner, straining to be heard over the lord's booming laughter. He slaps his thigh at some joke he half invented, while his guests nod eagerly, though their eyes look about as alive as boiled turnips. You can almost hear their inner thoughts, smile, laugh, and maybe he won't raise my taxes again. Meanwhile, the servants glide in shadows. Their world is one of endless errands, stirring the pot, polishing boots, hauling water, scrubbing floors until their hands crack. You see a maid balancing a tray of trenchers, her back straight though exhaustion clings to her shoulders. If she spills even a drop, punishment will be swift. Not a gentle lecture, more like extra hours of labor. Fewer scraps at dinner, or the humiliation of being cuffed in front of peers. A mistake is entertainment for the master, misery for the servant, and yet, you sense the irony bubbling beneath the surface. For all their grandeur, lords rely utterly on these servants. The lord's cloak doesn't wash itself. His boots don't polish themselves. His roast pig doesn't turn on the spit without blistered hands keeping it steady. Strip away the servants, and the lord is just another man in a drafty stone house, struggling to light a fire. You almost want to whisper that truth into his ear, though you value your head too much. The social divide is sharp, but not always as clean as it looks. At times, lords throw feasts where servants sneak scraps, or sip wine when no one's looking. A clever servant might climb in influence, becoming the trusted steward who manages estates and whispers advice. Power leaks in strange places. Historians still argue whether certain grand decisions, marriages, Even wars were nudged into place not by lords, but by the cunning counsel of those who technically had no power at all. Still, the grind of service is relentless. Imagine being woken at dawn to light fires in every cold room of a manor, only to stay awake until the Lord finally decides he is done feasting at midnight. Sleep is a luxury. Privacy doesn't exist. And the tasks, endless. One day you might be scrubbing chamber pots, the next hauling buckets of water from a well half a mile away. You dream of rest, but even dreams feel like work here. The comedy lies in the absurdity. A servant polishes a silver goblet until it gleams, only for the Lord to toss it aside and demand a different one because this one feels unlucky. Another kneels to fasten boots that the Lord wore for precisely 5 minutes before deciding he preferred sandals today. You can't help but chuckle until you remember that someone's blistered hands are real. It's tragedy dressed in slapstick. You wander into the kitchens. The air is thick with smoke, heat, and the barking of orders. A cook stirs a massive cauldron, sweat dripping from his nose into the stew. He doesn't notice, or perhaps doesn't care. Servants slice onions with tears streaming down their cheeks, though not from sadness. A boy runs past carrying a tray of bread, only to trip and scatter it across the floor. The cook bellows, cuffs him hard, and tells him to fetch it anyway. 5-second rule, medieval edition. In these spaces, you sense camaraderie too. Servants whisper jokes about their masters, rolling their eyes at ridiculous orders. One imitates the Lord's pompous voice, sending the others into stifled giggles. It's dangerous fun, but laughter is a small rebellion. A reminder that even the lowliest handmaid has wit sharper than the Lord's sword. The manor outside gleams with wealth tapestries. Goblets, fat hounds snoozing by the hearth. But wealth sits on the backs of servants who are unseen, their sweat woven into every shining cloth. You can't decide if it's maddening or just absurd, probably both, and yet, in the quiet moments, you catch glimpses of kindness. A lady of the house slips bread to a maid who looks too thin. A steward, gruff but fair, sneaks coins to a boy whose father is ill. The system is harsh, but humanity squeezes through the cracks like grass between stones. So you linger in the hall, half amused, half unsettled. The Lord's laughter rolls, his goblet tips, and servants sweep in to catch the spill before it touches the floor. They are invisible until they fail, and then unforgettable in the worst way. You sip this scene slowly, realizing the Dark Ages were not just mud and swords, but endless little performances of power and survival. And just like that, the fire flickers, shadows stretch, and the dance of lords and servants plays on, equal parts comedy and tragedy, always keeping you wondering who is really in charge. You lie back, eyes heavy, as the night drifts you into another chapter of this world that feels both impossibly distant and uncomfortably close. Love, yes, even in the so-called Dark Ages, that stubborn little ember flickers. Only here, it often arrives dressed in armor or wrapped in myth, more exaggerated than a minstrel's song. You find yourself walking through a courtyard where ivy climbs the stone, and whispers float through the air like smoke. A knight swears his devotion beneath a lady's balcony, though you suspect he's rehearsed those lines on at least 3 others this week. Ah, romance timelessly messy. Nearby, villagers gather around a fire, retelling stories so embroidered they would put modern gossip magazines to shame. Tristan and Isolde, doomed lovers whose tale was sung until every version contradicted the last. Was it passion, poison, or political intrigue? Even now, historians shrugged and admit the line between fact and legend has blurred beyond rescue. What survives is less the truth and more the feeling. The collective sighs of people desperate to believe that love, real, impossible, or tragic, was stronger than famine, war, or plague. You walk past a tavern, the smell of stale ale clinging to the wood beams. A bard strums a lute, his voice weaving a ballad of Lancelot and Guinevere, the noble knight and the queen whose secret burned hotter than any hearth fire. You hear the gasps, the chuckles, the murmured judgments. A few men slap each other on the back, muttering that if they had been in Lancelot's shoes, things might have ended differently. As if one wonders how many of them even owned shoes. There's something soothing in these stories. They were never merely entertainment, they were glue, stitching together a community against the chill of winter nights. Tales of love became medicine, distraction, sometimes even propaganda. A lord might sponsor a story that painted him as noble and just, inserting himself into romances of the past. Imagine a medieval PR campaign, except with parchment and ink instead of glossy billboards. Effective. Well, let's just say, people still whispered long after the official version ended. You notice, too, how love wasn't always about romance. Often, it was about land, alliances, survival. A marriage could be as strategic as moving pieces on a chessboard. The daughter of one minor noble might be bartered away to secure a stronger border or more sheep. Tender feelings weren't part of the contract. Yet even then, human hearts had the audacity to feel. Behind shuttered windows, there were stolen glances, forbidden kisses, little rebellions that never made it into the chronicles. That, perhaps, is the truest love story, ordinary people carving warmth into lives otherwise scripted by duty. Some stories turn darker. You hear a crone at the market whisper of selkies, shapeshifters who slipped from seal to human form, enchanting fishermen with promises of love before returning to the sea. Others speak of fairies who lured the unwary into dances that ended only when centuries had passed. Here, love blurred with fear, with mystery, with the supernatural. It's easy to see how people half believed, half hoped these tales might be real. After all, the mundane was often bleak. Why not sprinkle in a little magic? As you wander through these whispers, you catch sight of two young peasants sitting under a tree. They're not royalty, not doomed by legend. Just a boy and a girl sharing a hunk of coarse bread, laughing quietly. There's no minstrel here to immortalize them, no tapestry to hang in a hall. Yet something about their simple closeness feels more honest than all the epic romances combined. Maybe that's what people really longed for. Even when drowning in tales of dragons and curses, the steady comfort of being known, of course. Not all stories were so innocent. Some were cautionary tales, warning of women who bewitched men into ruin, or men who betrayed vows for fleeting pleasure. These narratives weren't just bedtime stories. They were tools, shaping behavior, reinforcing morals, keeping people in line. And still, beneath all the sermons and wagging fingers, the heart refused to behave. It wanted what it wanted. Perhaps that's why these legends still echo centuries later. They reveal the quiet rebellion of love against the machinery of survival. You linger in this twilight space where truth and invention mingle. The myths feel close enough to touch. The laughter of lovers and the lament of the forsaken weaving through your mind like lullabies. You wonder, were these tales exaggerations, or did some kernel of truth spark them? Scholars debate endlessly, but maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the stories endure, not because they were factual, but because they gave people hope, or at least something more interesting to think about than mud and taxes. And as you drift further into the hush of this medieval night, you realize that love, whether painted with legend or lived in secret, was never absent. It lingered in castles and cottages alike, in the grandiose sagas and in the quiet gestures no one wrote down. Somewhere between the myths and the murmurs, the heart still beat, stubbornly, defiantly, even beautifully. The air cools, the chatter fades, and you notice the world folding itself into shadow. Night arrives not with ceremony, but with a slow exhale, the kind you didn't realize you were holding. The last market cries vanish, the clang of metal shutters replaced by the soft creak of wooden doors closing tight. Somewhere, far off, a wolf lifts its voice along, lonesome cry that vibrates through your chest like the lowest string of a harp. For a moment, you hold your breath. Then you remember. It's just another sound of survival, ordinary here, the way traffic hums in your world today. Funny how both can keep you awake at night. You walk along a dirt path, your feet brushing against straw and stone. To your left, a cottage glows faintly with a hearth fire, its smoke curling like a sleepy ribbon into the sky. Inside, you glimpse a family huddled close, their shadows flickering on plaster walls. The children, already nodding off, curl against each other like kittens, the rough wool scratchy but comforting. A mother hums, her voice no more than a murmur, carrying a tune that isn't written down anywhere, but it's enough to soften the edges of the day. In the distance, torches sputter along the castle walls. Guards pace, their spears catching glimmers of firelight. Every so often, you hear the hollow thud of boots against stone, the rhythm steady, like a drum keeping time for a city reluctant to sleep. Even power needs protection after dark. The flicker of flame clings stubbornly to the towers, but you know it's no match for the endless sweep of night. Darkness always wins, at least until morning dot closer to the fields. The sounds shift again. Crickets rise in chorus, 1,000 tiny fiddlers tuning their strings. The earth cools beneath your feet, damp with dew. Beyond, the forest edge stands like a wall of secret branches, twitching with movements you can't quite name. Was that a fox? Or something less familiar, shaped only by imagination? People of the Dark Ages would have whispered about spirits or fae lurking between the trees. And honestly, in this half-light, it's easy to see why there is comfort, though in how the night folds around you. The stars begin to puncture the sky, not scattered at random, but laid out in patterns your ancestors swore were stories etched above their heads. You tilt your face upward, finding Orion's belt, or perhaps, in this century, the figure of some forgotten hero. A lesser-known truth drifts to you. Medieval stargazing wasn't always mystical, sometimes it was practical. Farmers tracked planting and harvesting by these same constellations, reading the heavens like a seasonal clock. Romance and survival, hand in hand. Still, there's no denying the other side. Night frightened as much as it comforted. For every lullaby sung by the hearth, there was also the fear of thieves, of wolves, of demons said to stalk the edges of human light. People nailed herbs above doorframes, whispered protective prayers, even chalked symbols onto wood, all in hopes of keeping danger away. Did it work? Historians still debate whether fear itself was the greater threat, whether belief, in some strange way, offered enough protection to make it real. The deeper the night grows, the slower everything moves. A dog settles at the doorway, paws twitching in dream. The guards' voices fade to an occasional murmur, then to silence. Even the wind seems to lie down and rest. What's left is the pulse of your own breath, the gentle stretch of your lungs filling and releasing, like waves lapping against a shore. You realize that here, in this woven darkness, there is no need to hold yourself upright anymore. The world has pressed pause. A single candle flickers by your bedside. The wax drips lazily, pooling at the base, a tiny mountain of melted hours. Its flame bends and straightens as if whispering, "That's enough now. Time to surrender." You listen, and the weight in your eyes grows heavier. You let the night cradle you. Its shadows no longer menacing but soft, velvet-like, carrying you away. Every sound, the cricket song, the far-off wolf, the quiet hum of a mother folds into a single thread, braided into silence. Even the fire dies down to embers, glowing faintly like the last heartbeat of the day. And then, gently, almost shyly, the lullaby arrives. It's not sung by one voice, but by the world itself. The hush of leaves, the warmth of the earth, the rhythm of your chest rising and falling. They weave together, rocking you the way a boat rocks on a still lake. The night presses its palm against your shoulder, guiding you down, down, down into rest. You are safe. You are warm. And tomorrow will wait patiently until you're ready. End of script. Sweet dreams.